of the Ferguson Library Special Speaker Series that's been running all fall. How many people have been to other programs here? Great, great. My name is Sandra Long, and my co-worker here, my colleague, Mary Abazia, we are going to be your MCs tonight. We are volunteers for the Ferguson Library, and we're just very happy to welcome you here for this special program. Tonight's program, we're going to have 3 speakers talk to us about their experiences with the TEDx, and we're going to introduce them. They're each going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have them join us here for some panel conversation, panel discussion, so be ready to ask some great questions. So I'm going to start right off by introducing the first speaker. Shabari, raise your hand. Sharbri, I'm sorry, is a writer of fiction, plays, films, and television. Her stories have appeared in numerous American and international journals. Her first novel, yay, Dust Under Our Feet, will be published in 2019. She is on the faculty of Manhattanville College MFA program and is artist in residence at Sacred Heart University in the Film and TV MA program. So welcome.
I think better when I'm standing, but I have way too much stuff in my hands. At the podium. Can you hear me? Yes. So I think it was Stella Adler or some legendary acting coach who said being on stage, performing, was like being completely naked and being asked to turn around very slowly while doing it. And now imagine asking people to trust you to take a journey with them that might make them uncomfortable while you're naked, turning around slowly. So what I want to talk about is precisely that, challenging people's ideas, presenting a story or a notion that people might find uncomfortable, that might force them to think outside the box, that might even make them hostile. How do you do it? How do you bring them closer? So I started this journey a long time ago, a little over a decade ago. I stood on stage in New York City and uttered the opening lines of a play I had written. And within the first 5 minutes in that opening monologue, I introduced at least 3 ideas about the religion of my birth, Islam, that may have gotten me, and still might, depending on where I live, jailed or worse. I embarked on a journey of self-discovery with that creative work, but I was also challenging people's ideas of what religion is and how we related to one another, of reframing spirituality and certain political narratives. Some of these ideas were not mainstream and are still not mainstream, nor were they considered politically palatable. How was I going to open hearts and minds and start a real conversation about the themes I had brought up without people getting up and walking out or simply tuning out? I was vulnerable up there on stage by myself. In those opening beats, it was just me and a spotlight. It was daunting, to say the least. I think that is one of the main things that frightens us the most about public speaking, the sense of being exposed, alone and vulnerable, almost naked, knowing that you are closely scrutinized, your every gesture and imperfection, though I suspect women feel that pressure in a different way than men do. So fast forward to TEDx 2018. And I'm back on stage, and I'm talking about the themes I touched upon in my play, Raisins Not Virgins, a romantic comedy about jihad. It is still performative. It is still storytelling, and it is still challenging people's ideas of what a Muslim American is or looks like. In preparation for this, I focused on a few key things that helped me articulate my ideas and deliver what I feel was ultimately a successful talk. You have to write a good story. You have to make it clear. You have to give it layers. You have to make it relatable and resonant. Think of how you can highlight ideas that allow people to see the familiar in an otherwise foreign notion. Remember, you are trying to open their minds to something new and maybe even uncomfortable. So you have to write and rewrite this story. You have to give yourself ample time to rework the narrative so your idea is expressed authentically and clearly. This is something I'll come back to because the story is really one of the most important aspects of being on stage and talking. And of course, this is the most obvious one. Practice, practice, practice until you can't practice anymore, until you're exhausted. You have to practice. And TED Talks, they require speakers to memorize their presentations. And you can imagine, it is not easy to memorize almost up to 18 minutes of a talk. So I approached it, and I think everyone should approach it. I approached it like I was rehearsing a play. I was memorizing a script. And once I had the words down, wrote, I then focused on the pacing, the cadence, and the rhythm of the presentation. I then rehearsed in front of people. That's also key. It's very important. You have to, once you get it down and you have the words down pat, then you have to start thinking about the performative aspect of it, and that's when you have to start rehearsing in front of people. And I rehearsed in front of people who know me very well and are familiar with my ideas, but then I also brought in people who had no idea what I was going to be presenting, and also perhaps were not remotely familiar with the ideas and the conversation that I was trying to start. So this last is particularly important, as you should assume that your audience will be packed with strangers who don't know who you are and who may not be familiar with your subject matter. So once you've memorized the script, you start, like I said, now you start working on the performance aspect of it. And make no mistake, it is a performance. However, with TEDx, it's not supposed to be theatrical or overly dramatic. It's not a play. It's not stylized. It's performative storytelling. So people don't come to see an overly dramatic presentation. In a way, in that sense, being in a play is much easier. You know, you're given directions, you're given your cues, you're given where you're supposed to stand. You can be over the top to make a point in a play, because usually theater is fiction. More often than not, when you're presenting a talk of this nature, it's deeply personal and it's true. You're telling your truth. So always keep that in mind. Before you present the specific idea that will challenge people's thinking, you have to win them over first. And comedy is one of the most effective ways. I did try to do that in my TED Talk, and it was not successful. The same jokes and lines that killed in New York City elicited tiny chuckles in Stanford. And I was a bit taken aback by that. And Stanford is simply not the same crowd as New York City. It isn't. And the audience is not as diverse oftentimes. And it wasn't in my case. So I had to keep that in mind. You have to keep that in mind, which brings me to the additional point that you have to keep your audience in mind. Think about who you're talking to, who specifically you want to reach. It helps to have a target audience at times, though it's not always necessary. And I sometimes feel like it could limit you in a certain way, because if you're trying to create a universality in your presentation, that might not be the best thing. But keep in mind where you're giving the talk, the town, and sometimes in my case, the political leanings of the town. You have to think about these things. Another way to win them over to your side is to find those resonant themes that anyone can relate to. Weave those into the first moments of the narrative, and people might then be willing to follow you into what to them is the unknown and possibly scary. You have limited time, so you have to identify quickly what makes you personally open your mind to the unfamiliar and take it from there. Make them trust you. What inspires your trust? Pose that question to yourself. And then take it from there and think, okay, if this is what makes me want to open up to somebody who's presenting an idea that I might even find difficult to stomach, how do I then translate that to an audience full of strangers? Again, I have to reiterate, tell a story, plain and simple. Use your visual aids and flip charts and music, but tell a story. Ask them to settle in and take a journey with you. Invite your audience to do that. People love stories. Make sure also, while you're telling the story, that your elocution and your enunciation are excellent. You do have to think about these things. People lose interest if you're if your pacing is off, if you're moving too fast, if you're not clear in articulation. Visualize yourself on stage. Make it real for yourself. If it's possible to become familiar with the space beforehand, do so. And then visualize yourself occupying it and owning it. I was never big on visualization. I didn't quite understand it. It's not necessarily for everybody, but right before I went on stage in March to do the TED Talk, I closed my eye. I was watching the speaker ahead of me, and that's also a bad idea. That's not for everyone. Don't watch the person who's in front of you. Either if they're doing really great, it's a tough act to follow, or they're totally bombing, and then you realize, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do damage control. So I closed my eyes, and then right before I went on, I pictured myself on stage already. It was 10 seconds, but it worked. The day of, try to do things that make you happy and relax you. Learn to breathe. This is very important. This might seem like a no-brainer, but it's very important. I often, when I get tense, I forget to breathe. Make sure you have a few quiet moments to yourself before you go on stage. I tend to chat excitedly with people when I'm nervous and make jokes, sometimes inappropriate ones. And this is not helpful. It doesn't, it gets the wrong adrenaline going. So I have since learned to take a moment alone in some corner and close my eyes and breathe. Now, the green room can be a time of networking, but I personally need to calm down while maintaining a certain level of excitement in order to deliver a successful talk. Wear your best superhero outfit. Wear something that makes you feel attractive and empowered. This might apply most to women, but I think men would benefit from this as well. It's not just about being presentable. What is your favorite color? What makes you feel like a goddess? What makes you feel like a demigod? And gives you, in your mind, superpowers. I have specific things, specific colors that I draw strength from. These are like talismans. Sometimes you need a talisman to access that courage. Not worrying about your physical appearance or a wardrobe malfunction frees you up to be compelling and have fun. It's very important for you to be yourself. Allow your essence to shine through. You're always free to do this, but more so when you have prepared sufficiently and have the talk down pat. And then you can even improvise at certain points or ad lib, time permitting. This makes a presentation more organic and flowing, less canned, which will make you more relatable and lead to the audience more willing to listen to your challenging ideas. Now, if you falter, which I did during my TED Talk, take that beat, that breath, and regroup. I forgot a few lines of my talk, but I took a beat and I was able to recenter. When I asked people about it later and I said, did you notice that falter? They said, oh, we just thought you were taking a pause. We didn't realize you'd completely lost your place. And I said, yes, I did. If you don't take that breath, your brain will freeze and you will panic. And if you do, you will lose more seconds and become further lost. Visual aids are not a crutch. Take time and care in creating your story visually. I prescribe to the less is more philosophy of visual aids, as you can see. If your talk lacks polish and resonance, no amount of bells and whistles will redeem it. The operative word here is aid. The graphics are not meant to do the heavy lifting. Your presence, your story, your essence are. You must have fun. This is not an option. This is something that you must say to yourself, I have to do this. It is a requirement to being a speaker. It's an imperative. Don't just get through it. As long as you're prepared, you can play. Use your fear and nervous energy. This is something that I am still learning how to do because sometimes my fear manifests itself as anger, and that's not helpful when you're trying to talk to an audience. So learn to channel your fear, take that adrenaline, make it work for you. Use it to own the stage. Remember who you are and that what you're trying to express has value and that it is unique to you, which makes it all the more special. And this is really important. This is something I have to remind myself often. The audience, though they might be unfamiliar or challenged by your ideas, they don't want to see you fail. They are not the enemy. They want your success and to be swept up by your voice and presence. Give them that. Thank you.
get an opportunity to ask questions when they do the panel in just a few minutes. So our second speaker is Sean Brawley, and he spent the last, 25 years, Sean? Am I getting this right? Helping athletes and corporate leaders unlock their potential and overcome their fears and self-doubts and self-judgments. He's actually talked to us about it. We actually know Sean quite well, and it's always very motivating to hear what he has to say. So, and he helps them really elevate their performance. So his clients include, you have USC football team, you got the New York Yankees on there, GE, ITT, and even Dave & Buster's. So a nice range of a lot of different companies. So Sean, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Welcome. Right at this moment, even though I've spoken in front of audiences for 25 years, I've facilitated many different groups in sports and business, my heart is beating really fast right now. And my face feels warm. Why do you think that would be? So it could be all of that. When I gave my TED Talk, for the first time in 25 years, I went up on stage and my heart was beating even faster than it is now. My hands were sweating, and I completely blanked out. And I said about, I think, 3 sentences, and then I just stopped speaking. And they thought that there was something wrong with the microphone. So we started all over again, and because we started all over again, I was just fine the second time around. What I'd like to talk to you tonight about is what could be called the inner game of speaking, or the mental side. How do you, Sharbury. So there's 2 things that Sharbury said that I want to emphasize. One is story, and the other is practice, practice, practice. And these are 2 of the most important things that I have found are really, they're really critical, and they're critical for a very specific reason. The chances that you will be nervous whenever you give a talk are extremely high. That's normal. This heart pounding right now, just beating a little faster than normal, face a little warm, it's because I'm about ready to perform. And when we perform anything, when I go and play a tennis match, if I go and watch even my son play a basketball game, I notice that certain vitals are elevated. There's a reason for that. So because of what happens, though, when we get nervous, the blood flows to the bigger muscle groups. It flows outside of the brain. We lose access to the left side of the thinking brain. And so if there's something that you haven't remembered, then you lose access to it. You literally become stupid. Same thing happens in sports. If you haven't mastered something and you get really nervous, you start doing really stupid things. And so what's important is to practice and really memorize it. And the reason why you want to memorize it is because it's lodged in another part of the brain that isn't as affected by the nervousness. And where the story comes in, and where I made my mistake, if you want to call it that, is that when I speak on the power of focus, I almost always open with a story about the New York Yankees. There I was in the hallowed ground of the New York Yankee training camp in Tampa, Florida, and I could go on and on. I mean, I've said that thing 100 times, you know. I could say that in my sleep. But I had this epiphany while I was practicing, and I got this, really beautiful opening that was really heartfelt. And I practiced over and over again, but I didn't get it down before I gave the talk. And I was debating right before the talk whether to open with the Yankees story, which I knew so well, or this thing. And I went with the new thing, but I didn't remember it because of what I'm talking about. I couldn't recall after the first paragraph. And so I had to really stop and take a big breath. And so, again, what's really helpful is if you just realize you're most likely going to get nervous and to prepare for that. So there is another thing that's pretty new. So what Sharbury said is kind of the normal thing. I've been teaching it for many years about breathing and about calming down when you're afraid. No. Because what happens is when you are nervous and then you start doing things to stop being nervous, you're basically sending a message to yourself that the way you are right now is not okay. And as soon as you start trying to calm yourself down, you're fighting yourself. And then that can send you into a vicious cycle. The best thing to simply do is to acknowledge that you're nervous. Feel your heart beating. Notice your hands sweating and go, wow, I'm nervous. I'm nervous. And the best opening in my TED Talk, since I'm talking about the power of focus and what can get in the way, would have been exactly how I opened with you. Is holy mackerel, I'm going to talk to you about the power of focus, and right now, oh my God, my heart is beating. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, I mean, that's the way, you can really connect with the audience. So where the story comes in, as I mentioned, is if it's even better than anything you may have written and memorized. Because if you've told a story over and over again, it will be very easy for you to recall it, even if you're nervous. And if you open with a story, then you have that period of, that period of time where you're talking about something very well known and familiar to you. And then as you're doing that, you'll start to notice that you'll calm down very naturally. So as you speak about something very familiar, how long it takes varies, but you'll suddenly start calming down, and then you actually will do what Sharbury is saying, where you actually might start playing. You get into the rhythm, you start laughing about certain elements of the story. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. And the breathing can be helpful because of the fact that we actually stop breathing. The same thing is true in sports, by the way. Yankee hitters, tennis players I've worked with, when they go to hit the ball, golfers, they hold their breath, when they're tense. So that's different. Like, breathing fully and diaphragmatically can help quite a lot. So really know your story, have it be familiar. Don't fight yourself. Acknowledge that you're afraid. Practice, 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 because the more you can memorize the entire speech, it's in a part of the brain that is much easier to recall under stress. And that's really the nuggets of what I can tell you about the mental side of speaking. Is that helpful? Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. Where's the third one? Aren't these great tips we're getting? I think these are tips that are perfect for anyone who's going to be doing a TEDx talk, but any speaking, right? We can apply these tips, so thank you. I'm happy to now introduce Sebastian Odo. He is the VP of Technology and Innovation at Octagon, a sports marketing agency located in Stanford. He is a dad of 3, and he mentors college students in his free time. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So does anybody know what the MIL theory is? No, because I made it up today. It's called the mother-in-law theory. And it's actually what I used. I didn't make it up today. I made it up when I was given the opportunity to speak at TEDx. And I said to myself, if my mother-in-law, who I love so much, she's been around since I was 11. That's when I first met her daughter. If I could make her understand everything, then I win. Because she will tell me the truth about my presentation. She won't lie to me. She'll give me feedback. And if she understands it, then I feel like everyone will understand it. And there were 3 things that I focused on. One was the story. The second were the senses, sight, hearing, and then shareable. And I'm going to go through those with you now. So the first thing, you've heard it from both speakers tonight, what's your story? That's the most important thing. If you don't have a story to speak about, then you could have fancy slides and you could have opportunities, but if you don't have a story, then people are not going to listen. And for me, in order to find out what my story was, I needed to find out what I was passionate about. And what I was passionate about, I'll go into in a few minutes, but after you find out what you're passionate about, then you could find out what do you want to talk about that you're passionate about. So for me, it was how do I use technology to be a better dad? I have 3 young kids, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and I love technology so much, but I also love them even more. So for me, my TEDx was about how innovation could drive more piggyback rides. So how can I use innovation and technology in my home to give me more time to give them piggyback rides? And that's important there because like you have go back here, you find out what you want to talk about, and then you come up with a creative title. And I had 4 or 5 titles, and I shared them with my friends and family and coworkers, and then people helped me kind of craft them in a way that made sense. I wasn't the only one that put together my TEDx speech. There were people in my life that helped me go through it. So that's important to remember too. So after I thought about my story, I had to think about the beginning, middle, and end. For me, the beginning was I needed to tell people about technology and what it means. So for me, it was, do you know how much time it takes to vacuum up after your kids leave crumbs all over the floor? Or do you know how much time it takes to go grocery shopping? So there were things that I needed to let them know prior to going into the second part, the middle, which was, here's my solution to those problems. So when my daughter makes a mess on the floor, I use a Roomba to clean it up so I don't have to vacuum. And when my wife and I want to hang out with our kids on Sunday, we order Fresh Direct so it comes to our home so we don't have to go grocery shopping and waste an hour. So these are things that I've learned over time, and that was the solution to the problem. That's what I told people in the TEDx. And then the end was to challenge the audience to think about what I just said and go out into the world and challenge themselves to think about how technology could help them in their life and maybe give them back some time. So the second thing that I wanted my mother-in-law to understand when I went through my presentation were the senses. So big, bold fonts. I wanted her to be able to see the presentation. There's been so many presentations that I've seen in my career that there are fonts that you can't even see on the presentation. That's people wind up not even listening then because they can't see it. So big, bold fonts, 1 or 2 colors max, clean audio and video. If the audio and video is you can't hear it or it's moving too fast or the audio or the video is just, it's blurry, people are not going to watch it and you're going to lose that moment of education for them. And then organize nicely. What I mean by that was I organized all of my slides as sticky notes. I put them out on a table. And then from there, I made sure that the story made sense. The flow made sense. And I did this over and over and over. until I really felt comfortable with the flow. Then, similar to everybody else that spoke today, I practiced. I practiced by myself. I practiced in front of my wife. I practiced with coworkers and people that I didn't know. I even asked someone off the street if they could listen. I was sitting outside of FIT in the city, and I said, "Do you mind listening for a minute?" And the student said yes. So I showed her as well. The next thing is it shareable? People, don't you want your TEDx to be able to be shared and for people to hear it? So for me, I wanted my mother-in-law to go to her friends and tell them about my TEDx talk. So that was the big thing. Is your story shareable? That's something that you have to think about. If you go through your story and you say, wow, that's a really good story, but no one's going to share that, then it's just going to happen at that TEDx, and that's it. And the big sharing moment is when you're at work or you're with your friends and you're looking through something and you find it on your computer and then you share it with your friends right through email. Like, that's the moment right there where this happens all the time at my job, where somebody finds something and the guy behind just pulled it up on his phone, is watching it. That moment right there, that's what I was looking for. So if you have your story, you have your senses, it's shareable, I believe those three things will make you have a successful TEDx talk. And then breathing and smiling. That's really key for me. Before I got up on stage, I knew I was nervous. I knew my hands were shaking, but I meditate a lot, so I went through my beads and I started going through the breathing exercise, and it helped me once I got up on stage to really then focus. And if you do it often, not before you speak, if I know I have a speaking engagement and I'm not going to practice the day before, I'm going to practice when I don't have speaking engagements, when it's just a normal Sunday. And that's important because then you get in a rhythm, you know how to practice, and you know when the moment comes, you can really deliver. So those were everything that I went through for the TEDx. And if you have any questions, you can email me or tweet me. So thank you. Or you can ask.
Or they're going to ask you right now. If we can have the speakers come on up, please. Sean's there. Oh. What we'll do is... Okay, so we're going to open up the floor, and because we're recording this for more people to see, if you could just speak into the mic and give us your name first, and then you can address one of the speakers, and if the other ones want to weigh in, they can do that, or you can open it up to any of them to answer. So who wants to go first? You want to go first? Okay, you think of one. Think about one. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, all three of you, for very wonderful and inspiring presentations. Shabari, I have a question for you, and that is, I was very curious as to the content of your speech that you thought would make people uncomfortable, and the reaction of the audience and how you handled it.
What is your name?
I'm sorry, I'm Shelley Michelson.
Thank you.
Hi, that's a great question. Well, the content of my speech was about reinterpreting Islam for myself, challenging the scripture, basically, which apparently is, you're not supposed to do that. But I discovered a loophole. And I wanted to talk about that, and how a long time ago, Islam was modeled mostly after Judaism and Christianity. So in Judaism, there's a lot of discussion about the Torah. There's back and forth. I mean, people want to discuss the texts, the holy texts. And so that was very much a part of the Islamic tradition. So when I realized that loophole, which has been by a lot of fundamentalists suppressed, I was like, wait a minute, that means that I can take this and I can interpret it for myself. So that was what my speech was primarily about. But it also touched on the fact that there's all these similarities between Islam and Judaism, and yet these are the two people that are constantly at loggerheads. And I wanted to discuss that within the Palestinian-Israeli context. And there's a lot of people with very, very strong opinions on both sides about this. So I had to present it in a way that brought things together, and there was a cohesion. So I was met with, I was called anti-Semitic and and Islamophobic at the same time. The only people who let me off the hook were the Christians. They're like, we're fine with it. It seems perfectly fine with me. But everybody else was pissed off. But then I also had people come in and say to me, I'm so glad I never thought of it that way. Thank you so much for presenting it that way. So, does that answer your question? Well,
The makeup of the audience.
The makeup of well, I'm talking about two different things here. So the first time was the play, Raisins Not Virgins, and that the themes that I touched on in that play that I wrote decades ago, I took and then I extrapolated and made it into a TEDx talk, which was called Between the Kaaba Sharif and a Hard Place. Now, the Kaaba Sharif is a sacred rock in Islam, so I was playing on words. You have to know that to get the joke, but I thought it was funny, so that was enough. I knew that, I was going to be talking to people who are interested in different ideas, because the theme was innovation and, thinking outside the box, in either with technology or intellectually and spiritually. So I thought to myself, this might be a good audience to present this idea to. And then when I did the play, it was New York City. So, I felt pretty safe.
But how about Sean or Sebastian? How about controversy? I know it's a little bit different in terms of topics, but have you guys presented anything as part of Shelley's question that was controversial that you got some interesting reactions to?
Yeah, I for a number of years, because of what I learned about coaching, my mentor was Tim Galway, who wrote The Inner Game of Tennis, which offers a really natural and more, in my opinion, more effective approach to learning and to coaching. And so for a number of years, I presented to numerous coaching organizations. For instance, the story I tell with the Yankees, it just so happens that because, like the first question, and when I got introduced, the introduction lasted 30 seconds, let's say, and the first questions, because I say, hey, I want this to be like a conversation. I don't want you to see me as the lecturer. Or the teacher. We're going to all learn together. So if you have any questions, you can ask them anytime you want. First hand immediately goes up, and the guy says, so, Mr. Brawley, what can you as a former tennis pro teach us about baseball? And, my hand started shaking. But because I happened, and I've never been asked that before, and I said, well, let me ask you a question. What's the number one skill needed to be an extraordinary hitter? And they talked about it for a number of minutes, and 35 player development coaches. It's the only time in 25 years I've done this exercise in any group that they were unanimous. The only time. It's very interesting. Like the first time I ever do it, it's unanimous. That still fascinates me. And whether you know anything about baseball or tennis, it's pretty obvious that it's reading the ball. And they have these experiences. All the great hitters have an experience of when the ball slows down, and it's like you can read the seams of the ball, and it's just much easier to hit when you're perceiving it that way. And then I said, so great, the same is true for tennis, and I've developed a number of exercises for reading the ball or the pitch better. Let me ask you a follow-up question, because I don't know where to go from here. How often are you guys having your players practice the number one most important skill? And the guy's jaw dropped, because the answer was never. This was the number one most important thing, and I already knew that from tennis. Still, to this day, the inner game is 45 years old, and to this day, it still is the number one most important thing, and most coaches are not doing it. What I learned was that when I presented in the beginning, I had judgment, and I didn't realize it. I was like essentially presenting that there was a better way to coach, and I had some judgment, so I actually got quite a lot of resistance. And then that taught me something, like, And then that helped me a lot, because then I opened up, and now when I present, I really mean it. I'm not just presenting it because I mean it, which is giving technical instruction and telling people what to do isn't wrong, but there's more effective ways to help people learn by working with their focus of attention, which all of the research shows nowadays.
Yeah.
But most sports coaches are not up to date on all that.
Good. Sebastian, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of was I wrote a book called Excuse Me, College is Now, and I remember presenting to some students and some parents, and the book is about how to be positive at college. And coming out of high school, going into college, I had a lot of anxiety, and the doctors wanted to put me on medication, and I said no. And from that, I learned how to meditate, and I learned how to use the power of the law of attraction to help me with my life, and it completely changed everything. And I was explaining that to parents, and I think I had some hesitation back that I was saying no to drugs, no to doctors, saying here's a prescription, but that was giving my story. I was explaining my story of what helped me, and what I wasn't telling them that this is what you should do. I was just telling them about me. So that was some resistance that I had when I spoke.
Nice. Yeah, you have to take that risk sometimes in anything that you're if you want to really get people's attention,
Right.
you take that risk. I had another hand. Was it Mitch? Or, oh, yeah, please. Was there somebody first? I think you're next.
My name's Leslie Mueller, and I've got some presentations coming up probably in a couple months for a business that I'm doing, and I'm having a little trouble with the beginning of it, figuring out what it's going to be. So you talk about tell your story. Do you suggest humor? We talked about humor. I mean, how do you figure out how to actually open something to grab them? Is it a problem that you're solving? Is it, this was my journey? Is it, hey, did you hear this one?
For me, I would always start with passion, right?
Oh,
Like
okay.
what you're passionate about, something that you could really speak very from the heart. If you could speak from the heart, you'll connect with people immediately. Sometimes with jokes, I've used jokes in the beginning, like tonight with the mother-in-law thing, but like there are times where it just doesn't work. So I always start with the passion first. So if it's something that I'm presenting on, if it's a cupcake shop and I'm presenting to a bunch of venture capitalists, I'm going to tell them why I love cupcakes, why I enjoy baking, why. So start off with that and build the story up. That's my opinion.
Off of what Sebastian is saying, authenticity is extremely important. So if you're genuine and sincere, and your idea is clear to you, you have articulated it already in your mind, then impart it with as much. And if it's an idea that you feel genuinely about, it can't be a canned idea. You know, it's going to be very difficult to convince an audience of what you're saying, or bring them around to your side if you yourself don't believe it. And believe me, audiences are very intelligent. They pick up on it really fast. You can be incredibly charming, and if it's not authentic, somebody in the audience is going to be like, "Yeah, she's full of crap," you know. And that's the thing. You don't want to do that. You don't want to alienate the audience and immediately, you know. So keep in mind that involves preparation ahead of time, like understanding very clearly what it is you're trying to impart and being honest about it. You know, when he was talking about acknowledge your nervousness, you can even, if you're starting, if the idea is still, if it's formed, but it's still challenging to you, you know, you can acknowledge that. You can say, I'm about to impart something that I'm still working on. And I'm hoping that, you know, in doing so, presenting this to you, I will gain more clarity. I actually did that once and it worked because it was honest, you know?
What are you presenting on?
The value of museums in our world.
Do you have a personal story about any, museum that?
Yeah, when I was a child, going to some and how it impacted me, and now.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
Yeah, really though?
Everyone wants
I just didn't know, that just sounded.
When I was a little girl, I braved the winter storm of New York City, and
I went to the Guggenheim.
Stephen Walton. I enjoyed all of your discussions or presentations. How has the TED experience affected your presentation style going forward from that?
That's a good question. How has it changed my presentation style? So I present on a daily basis to clients. So I'm always literally I have to present ideas to some of the biggest brands in the world on a regular basis. And I have to be passionate about what I'm talking about so that they take the idea. But for me, the TEDx speech allowed me to really learn how to craft my story. So for instance, when I present an idea to a client, sometimes I would just have the idea on a page. So if I'm talking about the Olympics in Tokyo, I would just come up with the idea and say, this is the idea. But now, having the TEDx, it allowed me to tell the story about, if I'm presenting something, for instance, origami, how the culture in Tokyo accepts origami, and what the story is, and why there's passion points in Tokyo about that, and kind of build my story to then present the idea. That's how, and I remember that with TEDx. It's allowed me to stop and think about that. So that's what happened with me.
We're equal opportunity sharers.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm used to being on stage and performing and telling a story, but this was markedly different because, like I said, though it is performative, it is not melodrama, and it is not, you're not supposed to it be overly dramatized, be overly physical, But it was about crafting a story in a different way. It was about understanding flow. And you have to do that when you're writing as well. I'm a fiction writer, and I understand that you have to do that. But it was like, I never have to read my stories out loud from memory. So, so it made me more organized. I think it's made me a stronger speaker. I certainly don't relish memorizing things, but that's always a good exercise in general.
I'm not sure, I learned a lot from giving this speech. I'm not sure how it's impacted me, except potentially to make me calmer when I present now. And what I didn't say before, because I was sensitive of time, but actually, Sharbira, did I say that right? Sorry. Arbary. When she opened about the vulnerability, and this is personal, but I think Brene Brown presents very well on a TED Talks about it. Ultimately, when we talk about people getting up and being afraid, that's true. But what are they afraid of? What they're afraid of is feeling shame. The exposure that she talked about and the sense of vulnerability. And so that's why you can't fight yourself. So as soon as if you're afraid and you're afraid of feeling exposed and vulnerable and ashamed, and you try to calm yourself down, you're not really going at the root thing. And so it caused me to research a little bit deeper into the whole shame thing, and there is an aspect of performing that is directly attributable to the shame response, which is there's a reason why you're saying yes to performing and putting yourself in that situation. There's a part of you that wants to be seen, that wants to share, that wants to be of value, and there's another part that's really scared shitless of the very same thing. So we want to be great, and we're really afraid and feeling shame that we're not going to be.
Wow.
So that understanding has really shifted my internal environment quite a bit, actually.
It's really good.
I hate speaking. know people find that very hard to believe. My friends would be, they were here, now they've showed up, thank you very much. But they would be laughing if they heard that I was shy. This is intimidating. I don't know most of you, you know? And so I do it because I'm afraid. If that makes sense.
Well,
No.
I've been speaking for 25 years. So, see, this is the thing: is it's just an experience, and you learn from the experience. And
Yeah.
I've been doing it and I teach it. So there's also an element for me of like, what a hypocrite! Like, how can I be talking,
But that makes sense.
about the power of focus and the inner game when. That's why it would have been way more honest if I just said, shit, my heart is beating really, and then like work that in. That would have been unbelievable. I've thought about that as I was driving home. It was like, oh man, that would have been awesome.
So, Stephen, thank you for the question.
My name is Aditya Gute. One of the parts that I enjoy in great speeches is metaphors and the descriptive language that they use. So how do you guys practice? And one of the points that Sharbari mentioned is usage of the words. Once you have the story written out, usage of the words. And that's something I struggle with. So I would love to hear how you practice it and using the right words and metaphors.
Well, like I said, it's a performance. So it's like rehearsing for a play. It's a story. So you when you write it, you pick your words very carefully with consideration, because you must impart your idea honestly and effectively. And when you're rehearsing it, and metaphors and analogies are great. I mean, they really help, because it's also a teaching opportunity, right? So it definitely helps to have those. And you approach it like a performance, and you rehearse it that way. As I said, without being, as I said, overly dramatic.
No, the only thing I can say is I don't think about it. I mean, metaphor is the foundation of our language. I'm aware of that, but I don't consciously try. For me, it's an idea or a principle, a story, and then, really trying to make it really stick in some way. That's, for me, that's my pattern.
I would add, actually, another thought to what you're saying. If you're struggling with language, you have to keep it simple. Always keep it simple. Don't try to overcompensate. Don't try to, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So just approach it that way. And then, you'll be amazed if you do that, suddenly some lyricism comes to you naturally. If you're not trying too hard to find the poetry, it comes. Does that make sense?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have one question. There are so many different outlets for speaking engagements. There are speaking in museums, in libraries, in media, in radio interviews, TV, and TED Talks became an outlet on itself. I'd love to hear how the opportunity came to each one of you to give a TEDx talk.
I'll go first. It's actually pretty funny. So I work at a 5-story building. I'm on the 3rd floor. We just moved into this beautiful building. I love espresso. And I remember going up in the elevator, and I remember smelling espresso on the 2nd floor. I'm not even lying. I was like, where is that smell coming from? And I went to the 2nd floor, and I was just looking around. I wound up meeting someone there and building a friendship with that person over coffee. And that person happened to be the person to produce the TEDx here, who got the job to actually produce it. And he had recommended me, along with some other people that worked for him, and said, you would really be great. You would love this. It's about innovation. You do technology. And it was over coffee. It was over coffee that that it all happened. His name was Jeffrey Kay, and he helped do the whole production here at the library. But that's how for me.
Similar. I mean, I didn't try. I was asked. A friend of mine recommended me to Jeffrey and the board, and I've spoken many times. I had some YouTube videos up that they could review, and I said yes. It was, and so yeah, it's simple.
Just that, having some videos available is helpful if you want to get noticed, right? Is it?
I have a feeling I would have gotten. I mean, I think this. If I hadn't had videos up, I have a feeling it would have been okay.
You have
Because
friends.
Brian, the guy who referred me, has seen me present like 4 or 5 different times, and I was always, the feedback was always quite good. So I mean, I think he just really referred me, gave me a good recommendation.
Very similar story. Someone from the library approached me and asked me if I would be interested in, and I didn't understand that when I told people about it, they're like, "Wow, that's incredible!" And I had been aware of TED Talks, but I didn't know that normally you apply to be a speaker. And in this case, I guess we were all approached by somebody affiliated with the library.
That was, just as a little background, that first TED Talk was the first time that the library had done that. And so, I mean, it was wildly successful to have such great speakers. I think this year what they'll do is they have, you'll have to apply, and there'll be a set of judges that will pick the speakers. So there'll be a little bit more of a system to it. But there's a whole way of learning how to do a TED Talk too, right? Did they
Yes.
give it to you, or did you have to find it?
Yeah, I was sent resources, and I did watch. And then I had a few writer friends who'd done TED Talks, so they ran me through it, and they told me exactly what to do.
It's always good to have friends. You guys have good friends. Anyone else? Yeah, same. Okay, we have one more question. Okay, we get 2 quick questions. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Keith Reynolds. Thanks for very nice presentations this evening. I wanted to know why you became a public speaker and how have you grown through the experience?
I'll go first. I became a public speaker because I had to. It was part of my job. So I had to learn how to speak so that I could present ideas. I'm an idea guy. I deal with technology and concepts, and if I don't know how to speak and explain them to clients, I'm going to be out of a job. So I was almost forced to learn how to do it. And my marketing teacher at school told me that. So I was able to really take her advice and go with it.
I had all these ideas that I wanted to impart, and I wanted to do them through different media. Because I write fiction, I've written for television, I write film, and I did theater. So I think I was just still experimenting when I was much younger, trying to figure out how to get these ideas out, and then doing it orally became a natural sort of evolution, organically. That sort of happened. Yeah.
I wanted to be famous.
There's that.
Thank you, Keith. Was there one more? Yeah, okay, of course.
This may be directed more to Sean. In terms of monetizing your business from doing TED Talks, has there been an effect? Okay.
No, there is a way to monetize, your talks, and I just haven't really done it. The TED Talk gives me credibility. So, for instance, I actually started a job on Monday. It's a pretty big job, and I know now that the TEDx talk really raised my credibility with the people I was interviewing. And I also interviewed a number of top tennis players, which I put in the same category because like Roger Federer and Venus Williams. So those 2 things upped my whole credibility in this past year when I was interviewing for that job. So that's what I would say it's helped. For sure.
feel like Jim Acosta right now.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. No, please.
Last question.
Say your name and please.
Hi, my name is Pat, and thank you. It was very nice to see you have three very different styles, so it's nice to, see how everything works. And prior to being in business, I was an elementary school teacher. So, there are techniques you have to draw from a classroom over 6 hours. It's a very long presentation, right? It's very interactive. What do you feel is a balance? I took that interaction into business when I had to do presentations, and it helped me a lot. What type of balance do you feel? Certainly a TED Talk is more of a monologue, right? But do you incorporate a lot of interaction, or what's a good balance for that?
I'll go first. So one of the things that I struggled with in giving a keynote type speech was that most of my experience had been as a facilitator, which includes, like what you're saying, a lot of interaction. So I found myself, when I was just speaking, like, wow, there's no back and forth. There's no, it's not as easy to read where people are at with how, with what I'm speaking about. And that was just another learning. It's a different environment, so if there's a small group, so for instance, I think I first spoke for 5 or 6 minutes here, and then I asked you a question, and if some people had started to interact with me, I would have been able to do that because we're a small group and it's kind of informal. You can't do that, obviously, with a TEDx talk or if I give a keynote speech for a corporation or something like that. And so it's a great question, and again, the key is the engagement. And then you have to go, well, what in my experience have I used to keep people focused and engaged? I think it gets back to really everything we've said. The story, a principle and a story, like that's really powerful. The stories are really powerful. That's, for me anyway, to keep people engaged.
Thank you so much. I wish I'd had time to memorize, actually, to be more off book, because if I had been more off book, I would have been here, and I would have been much more interactive. TED, it's important to be interactive. I think it is. I really like the way you posed a question to the audience and so on. With TED Talks, you can't do that too much. You can. I mean, people do it, but it's more of a soliloquy than an interaction with TED Talks, I think. I mean, that's the what I've observed and the experience that I have had. So it depends on the nature of the talk. So TED Talks, no, you can't be, you can't be in the audience too much. You can't pose too many questions. But different speaker series and different types of presentations would want for that. So it depends.
I'm always reading my audience. I love speaking at universities because I could see if I'm getting boring, everyone goes on their phones. So then I'll get into the audience more. So I'm always reading the audience. I'm always watching everybody so that I can either raise my voice, I could say something different, I can interact with them more. So that's the technique that I use.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay,
all very
so-
much. This has been a terrific evening, and I think we should give a big round of applause for our speakers. Great.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you want to get a hold of them, Sebastian, I think you had mentioned, do you guys want to just write, we'll give you a marker, write your email on the back or however you want them to get a hold of you. And if you have more questions, they're a resource for you. This is being recorded. You're welcome to see it again. It'll be posted on the website at the library as well. So thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Hi. Hi.